We had a major eruption occurring at 8:32 approximately this morning on Mount St. Helens. It does appear that the northwest flank of the mountain seems to be gone.
Everyone who was in the Pacific Northwest on May 18th, 1980, has some kind of story about the Mount St. Helens eruption. That includes a guy named Scott Kemery, who was 5 years old at the time.
In front of me was the eruption up in the sky, and in the living room behind me was the news broadcast telling us what was going on closer up there.
Kemery lives in Portland, Oregon, and his lifelong fascination with Mount St. Helens led him back to the mountain to try to unearth artifacts that have been hidden there for more than 4 decades.
So we reached out to the Mount St. Helens Monument and we asked permission, and we gave them a full rundown of where we were going to go, what we were going to do. We were going to be very respectful.
I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast about the place you call home. OPB producer Ian McKluskey was also a kid in the Northwest at the time of the eruption and its aftermath. He recently followed Scott Kemery and some of his friends on a few of their missions to uncover long-buried artifacts from Mount St. Helens. So, Ian, what were your first impressions of this group?
Well, when I first met them, they're a very enthusiastic group, but they are a group in T-shirts and shorts with metal detectors, and we spent an entire day traipsing up and down these kind of hills of the backcountry of Mount St. Helens, searching for artifacts. And what we uncovered was some empty beer cans, a rusty wheel, and by the end of the day, I was like, this is not really my idea of archaeology or priceless artifacts. And I didn't even really know if there was a story here, to be honest.
Well, I mean, we're here today, and there is a story that you have done based on that. So when did that feeling of whether or not there was a story there change for you?
Well, I remember that moment. We were hiking up a ridge. We had been hiking for miles and miles, and Scott, the ringleader, was like, it's just up around the bend. And, I think Jerry Martin's RV was up here. And I had to pause and say, who's Jerry Martin? And there were 57 people who lost their lives when the mountain erupted. And I'd heard of David Johnston, the geologist, and the innkeeper, Harry Truman, but I'd never heard about Jerry Martin.
Everything I've ever read ends with no trace of Jerry or his RV was ever found.
Yeah, I had never heard of Jerry Martin either. Can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Yeah, a quick background. He was 64. He was a Navy veteran who had been trained as a radio operator. So he came in his RV to Mount St. Helens to be a volunteer, to kind of be a radio relayer, way back before cell towers, to relay any emergency transmissions. And he was parked on a ridge, just one ridge back from the mountain. If you can imagine like a movie theater, Johnston Ridge is like the first row of seats in front of the mountain, and the second row is where Jerry Martin had parked his RV. And that morning, Scott told me, the moment that the mountain erupted, Jerry picked up his radio and began to broadcast.
The whole northwest side is sliding down. All right, we got it, boys. The whole northwest section and north section blowing up, flying and coming up over the ridge towards me. I'm going to back out of here. Gentlemen, the camper and the car sitting over to the south of me is covered. That's going to get me too.
And I know that tape is a little hard to hear, but you can tell he's reporting what he's seeing as the eruption starts. And then he says, I'm going to back out of here, before realizing that's not going to be possible. He says he can see that the camper and the car sitting to the south of him is covered. And then he says at the end there, it's going to get me too. It is so wild to hear him have this realization in the middle of this radio transmission that he's not going to make it. So, Ian, what did happen to Jerry Martin?
What he's seeing is a massive pyroclastic flow heading towards him, racing towards him. And a pyroclastic flow is the mountain releasing this like tsunami of superheated gas. It's traveling, at a high speed, faster than a car can drive, at temperatures that are just searing, that are just scalding everything, kind of eviscerating everything in their wake.
Gosh, I mean, that sounds so scary. That sounds like nightmares that I've had, honestly.
It's incredible just to think of the people like Harry Truman, David Johnston, and Jerry Martin watching this coming straight at them. And for that reason, Scott has just had this deep respect for Jerry Martin and what he did that morning.
What he did was a big deal, not just helping warn the valley down below that there was an eruption coming, but scientifically they were able to figure out the speed of the eruption, the surge, by his narration.
And so Scott's been kind of on this quest to try to locate where Jerry was that morning. We have the broadcast, but we don't really know where he was, and Scott wants to go find that spot.
Yeah, and while you were out with him and his friends, he did find something, right?
Yeah, he, up on the top of this ridge, kind of in plain view of directly in front of the open chasm that is the Mount St. Helens crater, he found this rusted engine kind of barely sticking out of the weeds. And it was rusted and it had clearly been there a long time. Mm-hmm. And since then, since we've published the story and people have seen the video, folks that have seen the documentary and commented on the YouTube say that it is probably a diesel engine from a piece of logging equipment. It probably is bigger and more powerful than an RV engine. But it was pretty exciting to be there and to think, maybe this is something. Maybe this is part of the story.
Yeah, and I mean, either way, it seems like it set you on a path of learning more about two more people who died that day on Mount St. Helens.
Absolutely, yeah.
So can you tell us a bit more about the innkeeper you mentioned, Harry Truman?
Well, it's not the former president, Harry Truman.
Right. Also not Sheriff Harry Truman from Twin Peaks.
I love you, Sheriff Truman.
Oh, nice Northwest reference.
Thank you.
This Harry Truman was an old guy in his 80s. He operated a lodge up on Spirit Lake, which was right at the kind of the base of Mount St. Helens. And before the eruption, Spirit Lake was a really popular, beautiful recreation spot. There was camping and some summer camps for kids and other lodges. And one of the other lodges was owned by the Smith family. And I got to speak with Mark Smith, who remembers Harry Truman really well.
Harry was 82 or 83 at the time, and he'd been up there for over 51 years. And Truman, you know, in his mind, the mountain was Truman, and Truman was the mountain. And if you talked to him in any of that time period, you knew that. But even before the mountain erupted, Harry Truman was a legend in this area because of that.
And Harry Truman refused to leave the mountain even when it seemed like an eruption was imminent, right?
Yeah, the news reporters portrayed him as this kind of lone holdout, this kind of crazy old coot who was just too stubborn to, leave the mountain and get out of the danger zone.
Crusty old Harry Truman remains.
No, I'm not going to leave. You're damn right I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay here. If I left, it'd kill me. If I left this place and lost my home, I'd die in a week. I couldn't live. I couldn't stand it.
And I remember watching Harry on the news, and he was cantankerous. He swore a lot. He always was swirling a glass of Coke and whiskey. And he's always portrayed as sort of this loner, this kind of crazy old hermit of the mountain. Mm-hmm. But what I didn't realize until doing this story is that there was another layer, and a much more human layer to Harry, and that he had been married to this woman, Edna, for many years, and they had run the lodge together. And just a few years before, she unexpectedly died of a heart attack. And so he was actually widowed and alone. And he was alone in this lodge with all his memories, and he was in his 80s. So it added a new dimension of sympathy for me of why he might not have wanted to leave.
Yeah, I mean, that feels deeply understandable to me as well. And just like Jerry Martin, I guess nobody knows exactly what happened to Harry.
I mean, honestly, it seems like no one could have survived up there that day. But there is kind of a myth that has come out of that, and it came from Harry himself. He would tell reporters, they'd say, Harry, what are you going to do if the mountain erupts? And he'd say, oh, I've got a cave. I've got whiskey hidden in it. I've got plenty of food. I will be fine. Don't worry about me.
Well, the legend of Harry's Cave is another Truman story that will live on forever, and I think people will be in search of it for quite a while. It's important to think that someday someone will find it or identify it, and I won't be the person to say that it doesn't exist.
Harry Truman sounds like a real character.
Yeah, I mean, people just loved him. I mean, and even little school kids would connect with him, and they would write him letters. He talked about how many letters he would get from school kids, asking him to leave or concerned about his safety. And Scott, who was just a kid too, remembers the day that the mountain exploded and thinking about Harry.
And my dad caught me out on the steps, and he's like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be in bed." I'm like, "Dad, it's dark out. What's Harry going to do? He's old, and he's probably hurt, and he's by himself. How are they going to find Harry in all this darkness?" And I was only 5, but I knew enough, watching the news all day with all the destruction and all the smoke and everything. I knew it was bad, but now the sun was down, so you just couldn't see how bad it was. And I was worried, how are they going to find Harry's cave?
Gosh, I mean, it's kind of sad to think of this 5-year-old who has enough awareness of what's going on that he knew there was a man there that he recognized, that he remembered, and being so worried that something very bad could have happened to him, but also in a way holding on to this idea that he was alive. And I mean, this also seems like a formative memory for Scott in a way, because he's still wondering about that cave 44 years later.
He is. And when he's not searching Mount St. Helens, he's back in Portland and he's on Google Earth and he's scouring old records of old mining claims and he's comparing them to the landscape now. And of course, he's like, "Ian, do you want to go on a little expedition to try to find Harry's cave?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course."
As you would.
Yep. So we spent an entire day out on the monument hiking, trying to find this spot that may or may not have been Harry's cave. And I mean, I'm pretty used to hiking and being out in the mountains, but climbing and hiking on the Mount St. Helens monument is really grueling. It's the pumice plains are like hiking up and down sand dunes, and there's brush and there's wet spots and there's cliffs you have to scramble. And, we spent the entire day just trying to reach a spot, and eventually we lost light and we had to turn back. So as far as the mystery of Harry's cave, it's still out there.
Hearing all this is just amazing to me, how connected people still feel to this story so many years later. I mean, Scott's not the only one.
Yeah, one of the most powerful things to me was after we published the video story, seeing the comments come in by the hundreds on Facebook and YouTube, and so many people connecting in so many ways, saying things like, "I was a school kid and I remember the ash falling on my dad's car," or "I was, I lost a friend in that eruption," or "my dad worked for the logging company," or people writing from other parts of the country like Montana talking about how the ash had fallen and they didn't have to go to school and everyone had to wear a mask, and remembering that moment in time.
Well, coming up after a break, we'll hear what Ian learned about the man who died on a now famous ridge, a young geologist named David Johnston. In the weeks leading up to the eruption, Mount St. Helens drew a lot of attention because there were earthquakes and some other signs that the volcano was waking up. A lot of people were drawn to the mountain, including David Johnston. He was a young volcanologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and he'd studied volcanoes in Alaska. He was focused on a growing bulge on the north side of the mountain.
Right now, there's a very great hazard due to the fact that the glacier is breaking up on this side of the volcano, on the north side, and that could produce a very large avalanche hazard. This is not a good spot to be standing.
The scientists like David Johnston and others convinced the government officials to evacuate the area. They're like, "This is dangerous, get folks out." And so authorities set up what they called the red zone. It was a perimeter around the mountain, and they evacuated it.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, that saved a lot of lives. But also, David Johnston continued to monitor the volcano from a spot that was very close to the red zone. Why do you think he stayed?
Yeah, he more than anyone, understood the danger of what was possible there. He had commented that it was like a lit fuse to a powder keg without knowing how long that fuse was. And yet he stayed up there. He even went down into the vent, the crater area, to take some samples. And I've talked to folks who knew him, some fellow scientists that were part of that moment in time, and they said they all talk about how dedicated he was to the science. He understood the danger, but as a volcanologist, he was doing what he loved. And I think at the time there was a apprehension, but there was also a sense of, here's our chance, here's our moment. I also talked to another geologist who came to the mountain, Carolyn Dreger.
We all wanted some action, I think, and as a geologist, it was absolutely fascinating to think that we might be able to experience a real volcanic eruption.
And Carolyn Dreger actually went up to the outpost where David Johnston was stationed on May 17th, just a day before the eruption. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, this is one of the most incredible moments in the story for me, and I didn't know anything about it. It was a place called Coldwater 2. It was just a bare spot, an old logging spot on a ridge, and it had a great view of St. Helens from the north. And it's a place where the scientists could kind of monitor what was going on the north side of the mountain. And it was right on the edge of the red zone. And one young scientist, Harry Glicken, had been up there for 2 weeks. But he was a graduate student, and he needed to get back to graduate school to check in with his advisor. So David Johnston came up that Saturday to cover the Sunday shift for Harry. That same day, 2 other researchers, young researchers who were studying glaciers on Mount St. Helens, knew that David and Harry were going to be at Coldwater too. And so they drove up to say hello. And that was a woman named Mindy Bergman and Carolyn Dreger.
Here we are, 2 young glaciologists here with a seasoned volcanologist who has responsibility for monitoring this volcano. This is pretty neat. Let's snap his picture.
Okay, and so that's the picture that I've seen of David Johnston at Coldwater 2 sitting in a chair in the sun with his legs outstretched. I mean, in one shot, he's looking up from the notes he's taking to smile for the camera. And it felt like almost casual to me. Like if I didn't know the context, I might think it was just from some family's camping trip.
Yeah, it's a really haunting photo. It's so layered. Carolyn just snapped his photo. He kind of looks up and smiles at her. He's in the moment of doing what he loves. But now in hindsight that he's doomed. That place is doomed. And he had even told Carolyn and Mindy that it was too dangerous for them to stay and to load up their camping gear and come back the next day.
And David described with his hands, he pulled them out in front of him and said, you see that bulge? It could come right off the volcano and go across the plain to where we are and come up this ridge. We're probably at risk being here. And I think that you all should go back to Vancouver, attend the Sunday morning meeting, and then, make your way back up to the mountain later after the meeting. And we'll just try to have as few people here as possible.
And of course, David Johnston's prediction is exactly what happened.
It's really tragic, yeah. He was all alone on that ridge by himself when the sun came up that next Sunday morning. And he got up about a little bit before 6 a.m., started right around then taking notes, making observations, and collecting data, radioing back to the headquarters in Vancouver with that information. And then right at 8:32, the sort of fateful time, he was probably staring right at the mountain when the entire north face just fell off, releasing this pyroclastic blast that just charged straight at him. And he picked up his radio and he uttered what is now considered his kind of fateful final words, which were, Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it.
That is so difficult to even imagine. But I noticed that in your story, that audio, his last transmission, you didn't include that. Why not?
It's because that last transmission is really sensitive for David Johnston's family, which of course is understandable because it's a record of those last moments of their loved one's life. And that alone would be reason to be protective of it. But unfortunately, right after the eruption, when Mount St. Helens was kind of big on everyone's mind, there was a movie that came out, and the way it portrayed David was not favorable. And anyone who knew him, anyone who had worked with him, and especially his family, were deeply offended. And so ever since, for the last 40 plus years, they've held that recording very, very closely, not wanting it to be sensationalized or exploited by the media.
Yeah, I get it.
Scott encouraged me to reach out to them, to ask them about it. And so I did. And I connected with David Johnson's niece, and we talked about it. And I told her that my intentions were really to understand David and to understand that moment in time. And she explained the family's concerns. And she agreed to send me part of that recording. And it's the earlier part that morning, right up until that last transmission. And I was so honored that they released that part, because it's a beautiful little window that shows who David was, and it shows the geologist doing what he loved.
What are things like up there right now, Dave? Oh, it's very nice. Totally clear. You can see the mountain entirely. There's no clouds. It's about 10 degrees C. Over. Sounds brisk but nice. Any SO2 this morning? No, there's a little H2S coming from here, but nowhere else. Over.
This recording came to Vancouver at about 7 a.m., and the mountain erupted about 8:30. So I think what's so powerful about this is it just shows that even someone like David Johnston, who knew the danger, didn't know the exact timing of what was going to happen. And, you have to remember that at that point in the middle of May, the eruptions, the earthquakes had sort of settled down. Even some of the scientists had gone back to the places that they had come from, and there was all these indications that maybe the mountain was going back to sleep. And Carolyn and Mindy were going to just drive back up the next morning and continue their work with the glaciers and take some more measurements.
So we had reached the area right around the current exits for Ridgefield and La Center, and one of us said, "What is that happening at the volcano? What are we looking at? I mean, it's this black thing, but it doesn't look like it's coming from the summit. And it's not this clean little upward sweep of a plume. It's north side and it's getting bigger and it's really black in color. What's going on?" And then I think it was Mindy who first mouthed, I think this is probably the failure of the bulge that they predicted. And I think we both said to each other, "I hope that David's okay."
Did you get a sense of what it was like for Carolyn Dreger to reflect on this event today, 44 years later?
Yeah, I loved sitting down and talking with Carolyn. She had so many mixed feelings and so much layered kind of thoughtfulness about the mountain. She had, when she was younger, she had climbed Mount St. Helens right before the summer before it erupted, actually. And one of the things that really struck me was she talked about the loss, not just the loss of people, but the loss of a relationship with the mountain and the landscape itself.
These mountains, we thought of them as eternal. We thought of them as benign, as our recreational sites, as the defining features of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. This felt like betrayal.
She also talked about not just what was lost, but also what was gained from the eruption.
A lot of new awareness, a lot of new scientific research that gives us a better understanding of volcanoes and how they erupt and the precursors to those eruptions. A lot of good has come of it too. That has brought all of us in the science some sense of healing.
And Ian, do you feel like you gained a new understanding of the eruption working on this story?
Absolutely. I really did. I mean, it was so fun to go out and explore with Scott and to kind of chase that curiosity of the treasure hunt, the idea of what can we find? And even when we didn't find things, it was fun to explore the landscape that had changed so much and keeps changing. But I remember this one moment that was kind of drove it all home for me. I stopped on my way back at the visitor center, And I was going through the exhibit and I was looking at all the photos and I just stopped right in my tracks. There was a photo of a group of young kids, school kids, kind of circa 1978, 79 at the Spirit Lake Ranger Station. And what struck me was it looked exactly like one of my class photos. And there was a kid in it that looked exactly like me.
Oh my God.
And I had to actually stare at it. And I was like, is this a photo of me? Is this a photo from someone else's scrapbook of our school field trip? Because I was just young enough that it could have been, and I might not have remembered it, but felt connected to that story and to this place. And I realized there's something really essential about that experience, is that it's like all the people who experience this, they have their individual stories that are unique to them, but yet it could have been any one of us. And that there's a universality to this. It could have been us. It could have been our parents. We could have been on that school field trip. We could have been, our uncle could have been a logger that day. Our uncle could have been a geologist that day. And there's something about Mount St. Helens that just connects to a larger story that was so powerful for me. And I remember talking with David Johnson's niece, Molly, and I told her, I was like, I'd like to tell this story as if David was my own uncle and treat him with the same respect and to honor his memory. And I hope that that's what this story does.
I think it does. Ian, thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
Thank you.
You can see Ian McKluskey's Oregon Field Guide documentary, Unearthing the Lost Stories of Mount St. Helens, at opb.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. If you're here listening right now, you are part of our brand new podcast family. Help us grow by leaving a review on your favorite podcast app, including YouTube. Follow us there, and hey, tell your friends. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Nalene Silva engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Wing. Ian McKluskey and Todd Sonfleeth did the interviews you heard. Our theme music comes from Audio Network. If you have a question for us, please reach out. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.